Good morning and welcome to Potato Science Live with Syngenta. My name's Gus Merrick, Area Manager at Syngenta and Chair for this week's series. Today is our final webinar in the series, and we're looking at sustainability with Belinda Bailey and Dr. Max Newbert. And before we make a start on that, I'm just going to cover some housekeeping. So this webinar is being recorded and will be published on the Syngenta YouTube channel later on in the next week. No one else has permission to record this session. We can't see anyone at home or anything that any noises that you're making, so don't worry about that. If you've got some questions, please ask them, and if we've got time at the end, we'll answer them. And to do that, make use of the Q&A icon. And we will be sending an email around on Monday with links of how to apply for BASIS and Neroso points. And now I'm going to be passing over to Belinda.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning and welcome. Thank you very much for joining this morning. So what I'm going to do is give you a bit of an introduction on some of the work that we've been involved with for a number of years, and then I'm going to pass on to Max, who's going to talk around some of the new projects that we're involved with. So the last 7 years we have been selling environmental seed mixtures, and we've sold over 4,000 hectares worth, supporting 134,000 hectares of farmland. And this was done on the back of Syngenta making a global commitment of improving the biodiversity across 5 million hectares. And for Syngenta to be able to do that, we were fortunate enough to be able to subsidise the seed mixtures that we're selling here in the UK. And these pictures here just show us some of the different seed mixtures that we have had on offer. Where did it all begin? We've been involved in environmental projects for over 20 years now, and originally started here in the UK, now very much a global project, but it was all started here back in the UK in 2001 with the Scientific Buzz project, which lasted for 5 years, looking at environmental delivery on farm. And this was all part on the back of the Sir Don Curry report, and seeing how farming was going to change and payments to growers was changing. From that scientific project, we then had Operation Bumblebee, where we were supporting growers through training and providing a suitable mixture, legume mixture that supported bumblebees on farm. This evolved, and this is when the project moved into Europe, and we became Operation Pollinator. And it was around this time that we started to look at not just how we could do environmental delivery, but also what did it mean for the farm as well, and whether any sort of ecosystem services supporting the farm business. So this is when we started to look at the pollination. How were crops pollinated? What sort of pollinators did we need to encourage for the different crops? And did we manage to improve yield and quality through being able to put the right habitats on farm to improve our pollinator numbers, so we could support the farm business as well? And then this is morphed out into Operation Pollinator, where we are very much looking at IPM as well as the wider biodiversity. So there are many benefits that we can see on farm from putting environmental habitats on, and we know that, we can reduce runoff and soil erosion. We can be part of an IPM strategy. Obviously, we're supporting the biodiversity. But we've also looked into nutrient capture, improving soil health. We can protect watercourses by putting these margins in suitable places, and that also can help farm management if we're taking unproductive land out or awkward corners, etc. these also do provide a very positive public perception as well when they're in full flower, and they look very attractive, and you can see the bees and insects in these margins. It does give a very good public perception towards us. Obviously, now we can access support payments, not just through the government, also other schemes, for example, the steps through the Severn Trent Water. So other opportunities coming through for this type of work on farm. And then the new one is also to start to look at the carbon capture and what benefits these margins might have towards carbon and net zero. One of the projects that was directly involved with the potato crops has been our Green Headland project, looking at margins around fields to support the biodiversity. This project started back in 2016, and it was a joint project with IPL, the procurement company for Asda, Kings, who have helped support us to put suitable mixtures together, and ourselves. And we approached 6 growers initially to be part of this project, where we wanted to find potato crops that had unplanted headlands, where we could put a cover crop margin around on these uncropped headlands, and then have a look and see what benefits we could find. And the starting point was to look at the insects that we were finding, because nobody had looked into these, and we wanted to understand exactly what we were finding. Was there any benefit? What was utilising these margins? And then also how we can manage them. So we have our independent entomologist, Paul Lee, who was then going into these margins for us and doing some sweep nets, collecting all the samples, and then over the winter months was identifying all the different species that we had collected through the summer months. So some of the benefits that we've seen from these margins here, we've just got a couple of pictures on the left-hand side. Obviously, an uncropped headland that's had a near on the Elvedon estate, and you can see even where the ground is pretty flat, we can see issues with runoff, soil erosion from that irrigation. But just on another headland in the same field that's also received irrigation, you can see, and even in a margin that's not that thick, it could have been a stronger margin, the benefits there from having that margin and supporting the soil there. So that's just one benefit. The benefit we see that, the resilience of these headland mixtures, that we can travel through them all through the season, and they're robust enough and do not get damaged too badly from being able to travel through them when you're turning on the headlands. And then another part that we have looked at is nutrient capture. So on 3 sites here, we did some green and calculated our dry matter tonnes per hectare, and then we had them analysed for looking at NP and K content. And what you can see there from site 1 is the crop was very thick and it was still growing quite a lot, so quite a bit greener, and we were picking up more NP and K. And then on site 3, you can see where the crop had started to lignify, it was more mature, there was more stems in it. We can find that actually we're not picking up quite so much nutrient in there. And that is a part of a management. If you're really wanting to go for maximum biomass and nutrient capture, it's about managing these margins and perhaps taking them out slightly earlier to capture that nutrient. Whereas if we're really wanting to leave them for the biodiversity, for insects and the flowering, we can leave these crops to mature. And actually they are good seed producing margins as well. And so some farmers will leave them over winter for farmland birds to feed over the winter months and then remove the crop. So it really depends what you're looking for on these outputs of these margins as to how and when you want to destroy the crop. So just looking at those values of what we've collected within the canopies for nitrogen P and K, calculating on December's prices. I know it's changing all the time, but at the current prices back in December, we have a value here of £327 a hectare's worth of nutrient capture. If we look 12 months ago, that was around £200. So obviously a value there. We're capturing it using the sunlight, and we're hopefully keeping that in the field rather than losing it. So going on to the work that Paul Lee has been doing for us, doing our sweep nets through these different farms and on these margins. We've been over 3 years collecting the insects, and here on the left hand side you can see the bar chart, and if we just have a look here, we can see total number of species that were collected. A good number of these are beetles. And in one of those 3 years that we were doing our sampling, we did actually do some pitfall trapping as well. So this is where we will have picked up these big numbers of beetles. We've also got the group of bugs here. We've got wasps, ants, and then we've got the butterflies and moth spiders, hoverflies and lacewings. So a broad range of different insects that we're finding in these margins. And then if we look at the number of species within those groups, you can see here the breakdown, the different number of species we're seeing within each of these different groups. So the beetles, bugs, wasps, ants, etc., and hoverflies, and we're getting a good number of different hoverfly species in the crop. Basically, over those 3 years, we collected over 100,000 specimens, of which over 99 species have played some role in pollination, and 140 species are known to be predators or parasitoids to crop pests at some stage of their life cycle. And what we found really year on year, we collect around 30,000 specimens, and we can see up to 200 different species in those margins each year on average. And also what we have found quite interesting, we have also recorded some of the species that we have found that might be red listed or endangered or rare, and Paul's been feeding that in. So it's all been extremely interesting to have a look in these and see what we can find utilising these margins. So along with just understanding now what we can find in the green headland margin, we also wanted then to compare that to just the sort of the grass margin next to the hedge or alongside the field, to just compare the number of species that we are seeing, but also the total numbers. And what we can conclude here is that there's a good balance of having both the grass margin and a headland margin, and they complement each other nicely. So what we can find is that we're probably getting more the pollinators within the green headland margin. The grass margin will be getting more of the beetles, etc. But we've seen more species in the grass margins, but we're getting greater numbers of insects in the green headland margin. So when they're out in flower, we see a lot of insect life in those headland margins. And then if we break that down, looking at the different groups of insects, we can see here on the left-hand side the breakdown of species into their ecological roles. So here we've got the bees, ants and wasps, and here the green headland, we're getting a few more species in here. And then, as we mentioned before, when we move across to the beetles and the bugs, we tend to find more within the grass margins. And then if you look at them as pollinators or predators, you can see here that, as we would expect, more pollinators utilising that green headland margin with the floristic enhancement in there. And then the predators are more within the grass margins than within these flowering margins, which was, one of the objectives that we set out with the project, was to see whether or not we would have a negative impact on increasing predator numbers for crops within these margins, which is something that we have not seen. Moving on from that, within the project, we then decided we wanted to have a look at the ingress into the crop. So from having what biodiversity are we seeing moving into the crop? this was actually done within a carrot field and using water taps. You can see that within the green headland margin, we're getting a lot of biodiversity in there, biomass. And then this was in a field collected where we had the green headland margin, so that was moving into the field. But when we looked into a field that didn't have a green headland margin, we were finding less within the crop. So what we did then was actually take this one step further and say, right, okay, let's see if we can find how far these insects are moving into the crop to give us an idea of whether or not a margin around a field was good enough, or we needed to start to consider about putting margins within a field. And what you can see here, this is the headland. We've got good numbers, the generalists in yellow. We've got the pest numbers in blue. We've got predator numbers in orange, and the pollinators in the grey line at the bottom here. You can see here with all the different groups that they don't travel that far into the crop, and we see quite a decline very quickly at 25 metres, and then they're all quite steady moving further into the crop. So we're aware now that they don't move that far away from the headland. With this in mind, we wanted to consider that and see whether or not it's possible to actually be able to establish and manage these margins within the crop. So back in 2020, along with Eric Anderson, we built the two mixtures that we have. So we've got the brassica-based mix here on the left-hand picture and the non-brassica version here. And what we've done is just planted these up the tramline. So what we concluded from this bit of work was that, yes, we were able to establishment, and we didn't see any issues with the rest of the crop management through the season. And you can see here on the non-brassica, you can see there's another tram line of the margin here. So they were placed across the whole field. So again, what we then wanted to do was just see if we've got these margins running up through the middle of the field, are we actually then seeing insects in these margins? So just looking here at the sort of average number of invertebrates in there, we haven't managed to go into more detail and the species level on these, but looking at the results of the green headland mix, this is the brassica version and the non-brassica. We can see here that we're getting good numbers of invertebrates in those margins in the field. And then that was compared to just a headland grass control around the outside of the field. So we are seeing here the utilisation of those margins. So that's quite a bit of the work that we've done. And I'm now going to pass over to Max, who's going to talk to us a bit about some of the work we've been doing.
Thank you very much, Belinda, and good morning, everybody. So today I'm going to talk about a little bit more on the work we did in conjunction with Eric Anderson around that in-field utilisation of the headland mix. Then talk about what else we've been doing in the green green cover biomass generation for projects going forwards, and then touching on a bit of the future. How are we going to progress monitoring, also not just for ourselves, potentially going forward for the wider industry as well, with guys to what Belinda's going to finish up on, which is around the schemes, what's changing, what's happening, how do we monitor improvements to biodiversity and to the environment with what we're doing. Before I move on, just remind people, if anyone's got any questions, do feed them into the Q&A function. If you put them in there at the end, we'll answer all the questions. Gus will divvy those up and we'll get around to them. But moving back to the application trials, again, this was with Eric Anderson. And the trial data is around a trial, as you can see, the designs on the right, where we did large scale application trials with a boom sprayer, where we use sections of the boom with different nozzles We're using an 04 Leckler ITA, so this is air induction, 90% drift reduction. We were using what's come to the market this year, hopefully in time for the season, is our 05 3D90, which is an angled single orifice 90% reduction drift nozzle. Just also say Leckler is a dual orifice as well. Then the third nozzle we're looking at was the sort of 025 Wilga, also a drift reduction nozzle, and that's the 110-degree angle there. Now, just to note, this wasn't dual nozzle, but we used adapter so that we had forward and facing back nozzles on each attachment point. 3D90 is single orifice, but we orientated that forward and back alternating down the boom. So 3D90 had a slightly different orientation to the rest of them, because also the final one, which is not necessarily drift reduction to the same level, the Hypro Guardian Air twin air nozzle. This is basically like a dual orifice Amistar type nozzle. And this is obviously interesting for myself and Belinda because of drift, interaction with the margins we've been talking about, because that infield margin that you were pictured, I think Eric Anderson's done quite a few talks with some quite nice pictures actually of how application was done in those fields, where obviously that margin was throughout the field through the whole season, and it remained there and in very good nick through the whole season. And as you saw from the insect numbers, was a bed of life and biodiversity, and that was because of low drift nozzles switching off the nozzles at the rear of the boom over the headland. Also, where there was a misbed, there was the ability to cut off nozzles just over the bed so that it did get applications. And as such, we managed to make it all the way through the season with very good interactions with what ourselves are interested in, which is that biodiversity piece. But back to this was an application trial during desiccation, and we were looking at how these nozzles interact with deposition right up and down the canopy in potatoes. So just to break down the results on the left-hand side, what this is percent coverage, and the different colours indicate the different nozzles. So we've got the air induction, dual orifice, we've got our 3D 90% reduction, alternating forward and back angled nozzle. Then we've got the forward and back adapted single nozzle attachment point Wilga, and then we've got the sort of Amistar twin orifice Hypro Guardian Air twin. Now you can see deposition is always going to be easier at the top of the canopy. As such, that's where we get the high levels of deposition. But if we want really good kill with the products we've got on the market right now, we need to make sure we get good canopy penetration. We get that control all the way up and down the canopy. And as such, you can see that what would be potentially the heavier and more momentum droplets of the 05 3D, as well as actually the Wilga, they are penetrating, getting better into that low canopy with the 3D90 really having that benefit at the base and the lower quarter. Because it has to be remembered, if we're on dual orifice on 04s, we're actually got two 02 orifices, so we've got a smaller and finer droplet at those. Even though, you know, with the Leckler we're still at that 90% drift reduction, it does have differences for the momentum and what the effect on the crop is. So you can see where we're really getting that benefit. With 3D90, we're getting that drift reduction, so we're placing the product exactly where we want it. And that has the benefit of obviously putting more product where we want it and getting more out of the product we're putting into the tank, but also the placement within the crop canopy itself is vastly different, and that's where we're getting the overall benefit from this type of nozzle. So we break that down into sort of a more general term. You can just see when we look at that on average, what is the percent coverage up and down the canopy layers all together. You can see again all the 90% nozzles doing a fantastic job. We're getting less drift, we're getting more product put on. You know, it goes hand in hand over a non-90% drift reduction nozzle. Again, the 3D90 orientation of down the boom, alternating back and forward, has not harmed the deposition at all. You can see when we were doing these trials, we were doing quite long lengths, you know, 10 meter, 20 meter stretches for each plot, and these assessments were done. So we were getting very good levels of control from deposition of these products through the 3D90. But when we saw the breakdown, you can see this higher percentage did come from that lower canopy deposition, and for overall coverage, that's something that's really encouraging. So that's really good to see. So that's just a piece on that. As a summary for everything we've been finding in the green headland mix, you know, I think they can work really well in a actual farm system. Around the headland is the simple one. You know, Belinda's shown a lot of work we've been doing around what's in there, the biodiversity and what benefits like have while we've been testing with Paul Lee the biodiversity that's in there, we've not really found during the season any major buildups of major pests. It's been minor, more bug type pests, so they're not a reservoir for notable pest species, and on average we're getting sort of a 3-to-1 pest to predator ratio, so there is more pests, but they're, again, as I say, more generous sort of herbivore type pests, and also a predator can eat 100, 120 times its numerous in pests, so that's always really good. So we're hopefully building up a large reservoir IPM, and it also can act as a barrier to non-persistent viruses, as in the fact that we are not including any solanaceous or harboring type viral species in these mixes. We've got in the brassica mix, we've got oil radish, vetches, crimson clover, and phacelia, and then in the non-brassica mix, we take the brassica out if you don't want brassica in the rotation, which is absolutely fine. We're replacing with linseed and a bursting clover as well. So there's two other options, and from the data we found for penetration, for full-scale field involvement with this IPM approach of relying on natural predators or having them aid a program, we do really need an in-field solution because that drop-off is so rapid. So having that in-field, having the work done with Harry Fordham, our new farm technology expert on application, and work with the likes of Eric Anson in link with Kings, is that it shows it can work in the system, and that might be really benefit going forward for the IPM approaches that we would see. And it can be a really good approach as an opportunistic mix in the system to improve those numbers. It's not a replacement, it's just an opportunity mix to increase basically a food reservoir for those, usually the adult form of pests, of predators and parasitoids, apologies. So it's looking like a really strong approach. And obviously Belinda's shown the benefits of what it could do for soil health, soil erosion, and then the nutrient capture, and also production, because we do have those leguminous elements. So there is a real on-farm benefit of having these. But going forward, we will be doing more work on the green Helen mix this year, and we're linking much more into that, following on to that in-field work, but also maybe how it links to increases in bird number, etc. So that's planned some work for this year. But the other piece that we've been doing this year, it might be interesting, obviously, for any spring cropping, is the idea of cover crops and biomass offsetting, and going forward for sort of net zero type approaches that Belinda mentioned. So one of these is where we're looking at two sets, and the main one I'm going to talk about today is a new cover crop. We're also looking at a longer term leguminous headland mix that could be used as a carbon offsetting approach, but that's only just starting, and that's obviously got a few years to go. Whereas this cover crop trial, we've got one place down in Kent with Andy Barr, and then we've got one up north with MSP, looking at the effect of carbon capture, biomass production, and nutrient capture of potential different cover crop mixes we're looking at, compared to what if you left a uncultivated sort of fallow area, and also a little bit on the biodiversity piece as well. So this is just a drone picture of what we've got at Lenham. So we've got you can see the strip of untreated, we've got an oats and phacelia mix, and then we've got an oil radish type mix for biomass creation was the target of that one. In this field, quite interesting as well, we've got some strips of long-term sort of floristic mixes, but there is a lot of grass in there, so these are quite like long-term beetle banks, so they've been used also in this trial just to see how they compare. And this was the sort of trial where we were looking at different mixes. As you can see, we've got the three sort of treatments on the left, but also we're hopefully going to last us over this trial how to control these going forward. So this year we're focusing on glyphosate, but in the future we might look at alternative herbicide approaches, but also the mechanical destruct element, using a sort of roller cutter type machinery, and then maybe a little bit of integration into the soil surface along with glyphosate. How do those interact? What gives the best control? And then going forward, if glyphosate goes, we're going to continue this work next year and maybe look at alternative control measures. So hopefully we'll get quite a lot of data from this information, and the destruction will be carried on from this week onwards. Just a visual of what we've been finding so far. So Andy Barr does this as standard, but he has a farm mix which has quite a wide variety of different things. As you can see, the predominant thing that seems to establish this year is linseed in his mix. We've got the long-term beetle banks, we've got the untreated stubbled area, and then we've got the Phacelia and oats mix, where you can see the Phacelia is quite dominating, the oats are in there. And then we've got the all radish and Phacelia mix, and the all radish obviously being the major biomass creator there. So we're looking at this from the point of biodiversity as well. You know, that is part of Operation Policy. So how are we changing the environment to maybe what was already there, and how does it compare to other management practices? So from this on the left, you can see this is the total number of individuals. So how many total insects are we finding in these? And what we did was basically a 3-minute vacuum devac over each of these plots, 5 meter square area. That was done, replicated 4 times in each of the 3 reps. And then this is the average numbers that came out, and you can see some notes of total number of individuals and species at the bottom. But on average, you can see what we're getting is that the total individuals, and it's fully reflective of what Belinda was showing, that we get the total number being highly increased when we've got a permanent long-term habitat, and that doesn't surprise anyone. The numbers above are the percent increase over the untreated, as in the uncultivated area. So having a more biologically diverse area is increasing quite substantially the number of insects in the area, but they are there regardless, as you might imagine. The long-term beetle bank has a long-term habitat, which has a large number of insects. However, the number of species is, again, very much reflective of what Belinda was showing in the other study, is that we're having more diversity in sort of short-term, maybe there's different type of forage and environments there with even the uncultivated long-term beetle bank, because we've got an established population, and that is made a sort of defined ecosystem there where we have more dynamicism in the newer mixes. So that was quite interesting to see. So we'll follow on this work when the cover crop trial has come to an end, and we're actually into the cash crop, and we might do some work in that as well, see what the knock-on effects for the cash crop are. The next thing is obviously ground cover. If you think about biomass, bio-creation of carbon offsetting, and so just quick assessment about ground cover. You can see, and this was done in the back end of October at the Lenham site, and you can see what the cover crops were doing over the untreated. You know, if we're thinking about having to have that 30% cover, constant cover to be in some of the schemes, you can see having those cover crops really does aid that quite rapidly, and we're not quite there with an uncultivated fallow system. But even over the long-term beetle bank, the all radish mix, very rapid to establish and create ground cover. So that was really interesting to see over the Phacelia mix. Then if we come down to the cover crop biomass, me and Belinda have been doing some cut downs. So on the left is the biomass from Kent at Lenham, and then in Northumberland with MSPs, the biomass on the right, you can see the tonnes per hectare produced. And this is just a box and whisker plot to show what the variety of cuts were, because there is obviously a range of establishment over the plot. So we went through and did several cuts per rep. And on average, you can see on the screen now what those were producing in total biomass. Now, in the oranges, we've got the sort of Phacelia and oat mix, and in the blues, we've got the all radish mix. So interestingly, you would have thought probably the opposite of the results at Kent, you know, especially with the pictures we were showing, that the all radish was going to be the most. And, you know, we were assuming this was going to be the highest biomass creator. Now, we've also sent these samples off for what their nutrient content, dry matter, etc., so we can work out some proper biomasses. But this is from the fresh weight cut downs from 1 meter squared. And what was happening actually at Kent, we had probably a succession of about 10 or more frosts at the end of November, early December, and that actually really hit this all radish varieties we were using, because they were rapid cycling spring types quite hard, and there was a knockback there, whereas the oats and Phacelia did much more survive that interaction much better. And then we also had the effect that because the all radish was so vigorous at the start, the Phacelia was held back, and as such wasn't as thick and as large as the Phacelia that was in the oats mix. So this was, you know, this is why we do trials. We're going to get to hopefully to a point where we are looking to offer cover crops within the Operation Pollinator remit. So we're trying to find a good mix that offers everything we want, which is biodiversity, biomass, and is resilient in all situations. Hence why we're also testing in Northumberland. Northumberland, slightly obviously different growth conditions. We're producing less biomass, but again, it was interesting to see in this instance, we've actually had much more milder and even weather. This is right on the coast. So we haven't had a frost damage. So the all radish mix was actually producing a higher level on average. But in this one, this had a poorer establishment of the oats in the oats and Phacelia mix. So again, choosing varieties, we're going to try and get to the point where we have a good robust varieties on these mixes, and so that we have a good understanding of where they'll work in the UK, because we want this to be a wide offer and make it work in every situation, which is obviously a difficult solution to have. But this is some of the work we're doing, so we can have an idea of what carbon offset we can offer with these. And just a picture of what was happening at that Lenham site to give a visual. On the left, this is the same day we were doing cut downs just at the beginning of February, and you can see on the left what the oats and Phacelia looked like and what the all radish was looking like, and how starkly different was that from the October pictures where we've had knockdown. There is a bit of Phacelia, there is still a little bit of there is the all radish still alive in there, but it's been taken back to the growth point and is basically starting again. So these are the things we want to try and find out in trials when we're honing in on a mix that is going to be good for the UK to implement. So that's on the mix side, but obviously going forward and for ourselves, we want to understand interactions with the wild ecosystems, because we're always enriching them. We're never creating them, but we're enriching them, and we need to know and understand how to monitor those and get a better idea of what the interaction of having these changes to basically landscapes are and how are we improving them. So we're going forward with two collaborations where we're working with different groups where trying to use technology to understand this interaction. So one of them, which we're hopefully trialing this year, is a sort of live AI assisted auto generation of insect speciation. So it will count number and it will count speciations, and that would give us, you know, what we've been doing with Paul Lee on a wider scale, and we'll be using Paul Lee to verify these numbers to get an idea through the season and through all time points. Because at the moment, you can imagine what we are doing. We're doing pitfall trapping, which is quite a constant measure, but sweep netting and vacuum detection, you're taking a single time point for a short time, whereas solutions like these can run day and night and for long periods of time. So we have a full idea of what's interacting with pests and beneficials and pollinator insects in these margins. And so going forward, this obviously might be of interest not only to ourselves, but to the wider industry to understand how we are improving those environments. So that's something we'll be trialing out in 2022 and into 23 with a sort of live network that will feed into our servers, so we can understand what the biodiversity is doing during our interactions with Operation Pollinator mixes. And the next piece, and obviously there's an element to the pest side on this as well, is looking at a soil solution as well. So this is one that gets placed within the soil itself. And at the moment, we're using it to monitor soil health based on symphyllid and mite numbers in the soil as a component part ratios to understand soil health and soil health improvement. The idea being, if we improve rooting and organic matter in soils over the long term with Operation Pollinator type mixes, we would have an improvement in these insect numbers. But this is old technology. You know, funnel type collection of soil pests is being well established. The difference now is that we're using live feeds and internet connection in the field to feed this into a server, which, as you can see from the bottom, is just allowing auto identification by AI algorithm to say what species they are. Because the limiting factor is always the human element and IDing them. So obviously, for this point of view, we're interested in insect life for a metric for soil health, but going forward, you know, and probably will come up as a question is around, you know, how do these interact with other soil insects that might not be as beneficial, and what are the effect on the long term of having these mixes in? And this could be a really good way of getting long-term interactions with that. The team we're working on is Miklos. He's from a Hungarian university, and this is just him in the field, local to the sort of Breckland area, setting up one of these sensors in field. So he's setting up the sensor, and in the picture is the control unit, the battery bank, and we're just about to put the solar power panel on, and that will then help power the unit we've already placed in the soil. But we're also testing other measures. So, you know, offering a service where we can take soil cores, and then this is back at the lab, you can then place into a desktop funnel collection extraction unit and extract the insect life into a sensor, again, very similar to what was shown previously, that feeds into the cloud and can also ID. So you can do it both ways. You can do it in situ for long-term analysis, or you can do sampling at time points to get an idea of what's happening. So this is the kind of work we're going to be doing going forward. And I think this will be really interesting, especially for those long-term difficult to answer questions around how these mixes interact with soil life and soil fauna, flora. And with that, that's a taste of what we've been doing, what we've done, and going forward. I'm just going to pass back to Belinda, who's going to give it in some perspective of what all this means for us and going forward with schemes. So thank you very much, and I'll pass over to Belinda.
Thank you very much, Max. So yes, here we're just wanting to consider everything that we're doing around biodiversity and how in the future that's possibly going to fit with the new government policy and the direction we're going in, and particularly around elms. And we know that the SFI Pilot started this year, so the start of 2022, and be running for 3 years. And within that pilot scheme, the growers engaged in that will be very much linking in with government, joining workshops, etc., and feeding back a lot of what they're finding whilst they carry out the pilot, and hopefully that will enable us to make sure that the SFIs are fitting with the farming standards. So that's ongoing, but we have seen the first standards available to everyone. So anyone that's not within the SFI pilot is able to enter the first SFI standards available, of which around the soil health, that's the first one, the arable and horticultural one. Just at introductory and intermediate level for now, they have taken the advanced level out. But I think the idea around this is a lot of probably what you're doing anyway as good agronomic practice and farm sustainability. A lot of that work will just sit within that standard. So also within the standards on offer for this time, you've got the improved grassland soils, you've got the moorland and rough grazing, but only the introductory level, and then they're actually carrying out an animal and welfare review. But as you see there, as we go forward over the next 3 years, as they bring the whole SFI forward, we'll start to see the soil standard, the advanced level coming in. We've got nutrient management. A lot of the work that we've been doing potentially, hopefully, might sit within the integrated pest management standard when that's been considered at the moment. Hopefully for next year, there's obviously the hedgerows, and then all the other standards coming in sort of 2024 through to 2025. And I think a lot of what we do and a lot of the delivery for this needs to integrate with the farm business. And there are many benefits, not just to biodiversity, but to sustainable farming. But there may be some watch outs, and this is why we need to continue doing the research, because we may start to pick up things that we hadn't foreseen before. And some of you might be aware we're picking up that, for example, there's a concern that wireworm numbers are starting to increase a little bit, and perhaps it might be around some of these options that are available through countryside stewardship. We're having more sort of long-term grass breaks back into rotations, or for example, the AB15 in countryside stewardship, a 2-year plus the legume option, and perhaps that might be something for us to consider when we're looking at the options and how they fit within the farm rotation. So that's really all that we were going to talk about. Really happy now to take the questions. So I'm going to pass back to Gus, who's going to manage the Q&A session for us. Thank you.
Okay, firstly, I'd really like to thank Belinda and Max for a really brilliant presentation. I mean, there's some fantastic numbers out there. 4,000 hectares in the UK, under these sort of strips and things. It's just brilliant. And I think a lot of us are all aware of the benefits of cover crops, but not many people have been able to put the numbers behind it that to generate the data that Max and Belinda have. So that's really is quite fantastic. Okay, so on to the Q&A session. I guess some of this will be answered with what Max has said about the AI insect detection, but have we done much work about what species of beetles were found in the cover crops?
Yeah, so those numbers are based on I've got a list. As I said, it's about 12,000 individuals, and they've all been, they've all been ID'd by ecologists. So it's been a laborious project, because we did the sampling, I think it was probably around end of September, October time with Paul Lee. And we've only just got the numbers back because he spends all winter having a look at them. Because what we do is we do the suction trapping, we put them in cold storage, and then they get out, they're taken out and then ID'd. So there will be hopefully a report on this with a breakdown of the species, because we've got a very detailed report of all that species information and what was found in there in the beetle banks, in the cover crops, different mixes, and also in the fallow. So that will hopefully be available and have a detailed breakdown. But at the moment, it's a bit much to go through the whole list on the webinar, but that hopefully will be available to everyone.
Brilliant.
Can I just add on to that? Also within the Green Headland, we have, I quickly, whilst we were talking, looked at the report that we gained from Paul, and he had identified 47 different beetle species, of which one was a notable bee listed species and 2 were nationally scarce. So yes, we do have the breakdown of individual species of beetles within that project as well. Individual species of everything that he identified. So a very comprehensive and huge database of those results.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, well, hopefully we'll be able to make some of that available to the person that's asked that question. Another great question: what is the required width of a biodiversity strip in a crop, and what spacing, if there is such a thing as a required width?
So from our work, we've always been on at least 5 meters. So in practicality, it's a 6 meter width, isn't it? Belinda's has been probably the minimum benefit. Anything, the larger you go, the better. But that's I would have thought the minimum we would go for, wouldn't it be, Belinda? And then for spacing, I think one of the biggest things, and one of the previous projects we're doing, was that, to have a statistical improvement in both insect and bird life, 3 to 5% of your total land area in some form of environmental management scheme is beneficial. So it's about making access corridors for insect life, and then having relative intervals, and then thinking about what your hedgerows are doing and what that allows for movement of biodiversity across the farm as well.
Brilliant. Another question here, which I think you may have done some work on carrots. Has there been any work done on aphid pest reduction next to biodiversity margins? Yeah, so it's been difficult to do the aphid reductions, but what we've been doing as a proxy has been viral assessments. And we've only had a few trials where there's been enough virus to make any inferences, and one of them was Elvedon. We had about a 70% reduction in carrot viral yellow symptoms. Now, like always, that was in a commercial field, so it had also a program over the top of it, but there definitely was some reductions, and we were finding better ingress of beneficial insects in there. So there will always be an effect, but a direct link to aphid numbers, we've had difficulty having that data. So we've been using virus as the proxy. Okay, brilliant. And then this is a question actually from me. So £327 a hectare of nutrient capture, that's fantastic. What is the kind of cost per hectare of establishing a strip then? Because just that one benefit alone, regardless of all the many others that you've spoken to, sounds like it makes it a no-brainer. You want to take that, Belinda?
Yeah, I'll take that. So at the moment, the seed cost as of last year was £35 a hectare for the seed. And when you're thinking of margins, actually a hectare's worth of seed does go a long way. And establishment is very simple and straightforward. we made sure when we put the seed mixtures together that they were robust enough that they could be, not, I wouldn't say brutally applied, but a lot of the growers they'll either just broadcast the seed onto the surface and give it a roll, or just with a drill quietly tickle the seed under the surface. So cost wise is as minimal as possible, because we are not needing to cultivate to depth or have nice fine soil seed beds to establish these margins. So cost wise, it's you know, are you broadcasting it or going to do a light drill and then a roll afterwards?
Well, that's fantastic.
So
I mean, people got no excuse other than to buy it after that, so that's great. Okay, well, that concludes our questions for today, and this is our last webinar in the series, and so it just remains to thank you all for participating this week, and to thank Max and Belinda yet again for a brilliant webinar.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.